Mystery and Deceit, From Earth to Mars, Book 1 of Chaos's Orbit Saga. Written by James T. Hall. Narrated by Chris Pullman. Episode 2, My First Visit. While researching the man Greg Pace, I could find no way to contact him. People, of course, had their personal number, mail address for virtual correspondence and the like, once called mobile number and email address, but Greg apparently had neither. Mainly, I would have liked to have such contact information too, as I usually did, confirm our meeting time. However, I'm not sure if I could I have. The invitation was, after all, a rather secretive and informal one. In any event, I arrived at Greg's house at 10 a.m. sharp. On ringing the doorbell, I could hear movement within. Someone on the other side of the door was doing something with pieces of metal and wood. Looking at the door, I realized that this house had the old mechanical locks that opened with keys, latches, and tumblers. Quite distinctive. The door swung open, and there stood Greg from L&H. "Dr. Pace, do you have some time today that we could talk?" For long seconds he simply stood within his home staring at me. Finally he stepped aside from the opening and gestured in. I entered, removing my hat after the second threshold, of course, and took the place in while he refastened the door's locking mechanisms. Maglocks, I thought, are so much more convenient and secure. The inside of the house felt as Spartan as the outside, despite being well furnished. From the entryway I could see through a doorway into Greg's kitchen, which had a standard grow garden in it. The light that sustained the plants seemed to flicker ever so slightly. Toward the back of the kitchen I could see a table up against the rear wall of the house, situated in front of a window that overlooked a yard with several fruit trees. To my left was the man's living room, with but two chairs facing each other across a small coffee table. A large bay window, partly veiled by a privacy field, looked out onto Limekiln Road and the typical traffic thereon for this time of day. Against the far wall was a large floor-to-ceiling tiered shelf of plants. Some looked purely ornamental, others seemed like various types of herbs, including rosemary, sweet basil of the purple variety, and parsley, among others I could not identify at a glance. To the left of the kitchen I could see stairs leading to the second level, with a dining room just beyond. At the table were two chairs, opposite each other on the short sides. No real adornments were on the walls, save a standard weather clock. What furniture there was, while exquisite in design, was very plain in trimming. Possibly the best way to describe the house was minimalist. Greg walked past me and gestured to the chair in the living room, whose back faced me, as he went into the kitchen. "Can I get you something, Mr. Hall? Something to drink?" "Water would be just fine, thanks," I replied as I set my messenger bag down next to the chair. A simple, high-backed, gliding recliner upholstered in tan suede. I heard Eric pouring water from a pitcher before he returned to the living room. "So, Mr. Hall, what exactly did you come here hoping to discover?" Eric asked me, handing me the glass of water and emphasizing the clay coaster on the end table to the chair's left. "Today I came with an open mind. I know you're a hero and was curious what historical goodies you have collected over the years," I said, then taking a sip of the water as I sat it down. The water was somehow the best water I've ever had. It was only water, but somehow it had just the right touch. "Here, let's get off on the correct foot there, Mr. Hall. Please, Dr. Pace, call me James." He smiled at that. "Then call me Eric." I hadn't seen Eric as part of the man's name in any on or offline source. "Is that a nickname of yours?" I asked. "I'll explain later. For now, just call me Eric." "Okay, Eric. So, how should we get off on the correct foot then?" "I'm not, as you say, a heroer," Eric replied. I had read him correctly, of that I was sure. "With respect, Eric, at L&H you reacted like you were. And only heroes have put enough study into the TDF to even know about Project Plymouth, let alone that it all relates to the likes of James Christopher, Eric Pullman, and the rest of the TDF leadership." Surely it was a cosmic joke of a coincidence, this man telling me to call him Eric. "That is a fair assessment, yes, and you certainly did surprise me," Eric said. "Before we go any further, though, how can you be sure I'm not a censor? Just using my knowledge of the past to catch another hero or scum." The thought had occurred to me, however. Nothing in your personal history or affiliations indicated that, I said. Plus, I had a feeling. And anyway, I said offhandedly, most university people dislike censors even more than the general public. The thought of censorship goes against academic open-mindedness. We simply know enough to know their danger to society. But I return to my previous statement, Eric said. I am not a hearer. Then you're a TDF agnostic? I asked. I had heard of such people, those that let facts speak for themselves and held no personal opinion about the TDF and Atmo's role in human history. Oh, no. I definitely hold a very firm belief about the role the TDF played in human history, Eric replied. Seeing it with your own eyes tends to have that effect. I gurgled a reply around a gulp of water. Seeing? You have recordings from the era? Nothing visual survived of the TDF. The government's Department of Censorship had seen to that over the course of time. Only descriptions from newspapers and obscure texts presented any evidence that they had actually existed at all. And the existence of such sources is what forced the censors to continue to operate and continue to recreate history. Well, that's not what I meant, no, but I do, yes. Just not readily available right now. Of course not. A thought suddenly struck me. Eric, he corrected. Sir, I said, how can you be sure I'm not a censor? Admitting to me he had such materials would be reason enough for him to vanish forever were I a government censor. I have better and more reliable powers of observation than you. It's not that I don't suspect that you're a censor. It's that I know you're not, Eric replied. Something in his tone of voice made me believe that he actually did know. Okay, fair enough. My mind began to race. The smugness Eric portrayed. He had something very, very important to share about the TDF, and he knew it. What I knew at the time was that whatever he would share with me would change the very course of my life. Then, what exactly did you mean by having seen? Are you prescient? You're asking if I can see the future like tarot card readers or psychics, Eric said. No. Their foresight is a brand all its own, and very peculiar it is, too. The man before me seemed lost in thought for an instant. James, I've been waiting a long time for this day to come. You cannot fathom how long. While some aspects of Martian life were harder on humans than was Terran or lunar life, Greg's age was still his age. His eyes, though, began to betray something to me. An age appeared in his green eyes that seemed to go well beyond his years, and for a moment his whole head of hair seemed to flash jet black. But then I blinked and his hair was as it had been. What do you mean? We only met yesterday. You met me yesterday. I have seen this meeting coming for centuries. I simply could not predict the exact date it would happen. That type of prescient accuracy is beyond even my savant abilities. There was definitely a twinkle of something, excitement perhaps, in Eric's eyes. Greg, I said. Eric, he again corrected. I've got to say, you're beginning to sound a bit unbalanced. Not meaning any offense, but is there medication you should be taking? How badly do you want to know the absolute truth about the history of the TDF? The real history, Eric asked, leaning forward. I offer you a choice now to walk away, for things are only going to seem stranger and more surreal the further down this rabbit hole you climb. I may seem off balance now, but I assure you that I'm not. So again, just how badly do you want to know what really happened all that time ago? His question itself brought about a certain fight-or-flight response in me. But my curiosity was unquenchable, as it always had been. This man before me wouldn't be a tenured professor if he was completely off his rockers, so he knew something. And any image or recording from all those years ago would be enough to warrant some present risk. Follow the white rabbit, I said. He leaned back in his chair, looking like a commander on a spaceship bridge. Then I do have 2 things to show you, he said, opening a drawer of the end table to his right. From it he pulled a piece of paper and what appeared to be an old print photograph. These are delicate, due to age, he said, carefully leaning forward, handing one of them to me. The piece of paper was a birth certificate. On it was written clearly, Eric Aaron Pullman, born 5 May 1980 CE. Suddenly, my heart was in my throat and beating at what felt like 200 beats a minute. "It's a fake," I said, my hands beginning to tremble. "It's real," Greg replied in an assuring voce dulce. No, it's a fake," I repeated, still staring at it. Eric Aaron Pullman had been the XO, second in command of the TDF, while their co-leaders, James Christopher and Meng Tao, had been alive. Upon their deaths, Eric assumed the mantle of command through the time of the TDF's exile to Mars. During the War of Insurrection against the United Terran Government, years after the Coalition Wars, Eric had been deemed the hero of the Battle of Thermopylae. He had led the counterattack at Thermopylae that stopped a flanking maneuver of one of Chaos's highest subordinates. In addition, he had been the commander in charge of the Battle of Chicago, which arguably saved the United North American Government. That is, the former nations of Canada, the United States, and the United States of Mexico. Eric Aaron Pullman was really the face of the TDF, and here on this fragile piece of paper was his name and an ink print of a tiny foot. I would offer you a current print of my foot, but I know that after all these years it wouldn't match anymore. My head snapped up, my eyes locking with his. My mouth went dry. Absolutely not. I tilted my head off to one side, my eyes growing large. First you claim to tell me that this is authentic, red, not even a fake. Then you also claim to be this man, this human being? No, I can't possibly believe that. It's simply been too long. Of course it's been. Here, look at this. But be careful with that, he said, pointing at the birth certificate. What he handed me next was a somewhat faded photograph of 8 people posing in front of a sign that read, NAR Defense. My already dry mouth felt like a desert. There in the picture was a man of jet black hair and green eyes. I slowly raised my eyes. The resemblance was striking. If it weren't the same man sitting in front of me, then it was a direct descendant, and one to whom fate had played a steady hand in creating. My hand shook. The one under my left arm is James Christopher. Under his left is Melinda Christopher, his wife. To my right is Adam Green. In front of us, from your left to right, are DeAndre Freeman, Jessica Brune, Meng Tao, and Claire Jakes. Of course, there's no real way to corroborate that. As far as I know, among the heroes, there has never been found an actual photograph of any of us, but I can tell you that you recognize the company sign. I did. NAR Defense was the company started by Eric, James, Melinda, and Adam after Project Plymouth. Meng, DeAndre, Jessica, and Claire had been brought on as equal partners sometimes later. "You're trying," I managed to say before my voice stuck in my throat. Swallowing several times, my gaze passed between the birth certificate and the photo. "You're trying to tell me," I managed, gazing back up at Greg. Eric, with a look of complete disbelief. I could not have been more shocked or confused had the man in front of me told me he was Jesus Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, and Zeus all rolled into one. "You're Eric Aaron Pullman?" "I believe that's what I'm trying to get at, yes." After a momentary pause and shake of his head, he added, "I had seen that face 1,000 times before, but to see it in person, I mean, I wish you could see the fucking shit-confused expression on your face right now. I bet you'd love to ball those up and throw them back in my face, wouldn't you?" he asked, smiling. I had been thinking that, but you just can't bring yourself to do it. Because what if I'm not the biggest scam artist the system ever saw? "Tell you what," he said, getting up, patting me on the shoulder. I barely noticed, staring slack-jawed at the document and photo in my hand. "I gotta take care of a few things at MNU. Why don't you take those with you and have every inch of them scanned and carbon dated? They haven't sat in a Time Spencer field a day of their existence. Come back here tomorrow, same time. You should be able to get the test results back by then, and tuck those away somewhere safe. They're fragile." My movements, stashing the 2 objects in the pages of an old print book I happen to have in my bag, as well as walking out to and getting in my car, still like near-lost memories of a waking dream. My vehicle's drive to the university itself was clouded in a haze. Somehow I found my way to Tim Fowler's office and managed to knock at his door. "Come in," came the absent-minded reply. He was looking at something on his tablet. When I didn't enter, he repeated, "Come in," then looked up. His face lost most of its color. "By the gods, James, what's happened?" Only somewhat aware of his question, I simply said weakly, "What?" "You look like you've seen a ghost, man. Come in and sit down." He came around his desk and helped me into a seat there, facing him. Through the windows of his office, I could see students walking to and from class, clumps of them talking as they went. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their dark green leaves a reminder that they weren't an Earth-native species. Close the door," I managed. Tim obliged. I looked at him and saw the concern on his face. I furrowed my brow, suddenly confused at that concern. "I'm fine," I uttered dismissively. To myself, I thought, what does he have to be concerned about me for? I was just told by a man by a living man, that he was Eric Aaron Pullman of the TDF, an organization that has been banished to Mars over 400 years ago, a man who, according to the birth certificate in my bag, would be almost 5 centuries old. The thought itself seemed rational amidst the irrationality of the moment, much as the idea of laying down and going to sleep seems perfectly reasonable to somebody who has just suffered a massive concussion. "I was talking to someone," I began as I pulled out the book from my bag. "He gave me these." I extracted ever so gently the birth certificate and picture, setting them side by each, facing Tim Fowler on his desk. He glanced at one, the other, back and forth, quicker a third time, then shot back from his desk, standing and supporting himself on the window edge behind him. "Madre de Dios," he whispered. I met his eyes and asked, "Who do you know in the temporal physics department that can be absolutely trusted? We need to carbon date these." Mystery and Deceit from Earth to Mars, Book 1 of Chaos's Orbit Saga. Written by James T. Hall, narrated by Chris Pullman. Episode 2, My First Visit, Part 1. Visit us online at www.narclaninc.com to link up with us.